You've been lied to about medieval castles. They weren't just cold stone prisons for kings and knights. They were living machines designed to outthink, outlast, and outwit the most determined enemies. Every wall, every tower, every shadow had a purpose and a secret. The wind carries whispers across an empty plain. In the distance, a shape rises from the earth of fortress, its silhouette etched against a bruised sky. To the untrained eye, it seems like a monument to brute force. Walls of stone, towers reaching like clenched fists, a gate sealed by iron. But this is not chaos frozen in stone. This is geometry with intent, a mind's blueprint hardened into rock, a philosophy of survival. For centuries, these castles have been romanticized in ballads and films, simplified into fairy tale stages for kings and queens, knights and sieges. But that version of history, the one we've inherited, is an illusion. The truth is stranger, sharper. Every detail was a choice born of necessity, ingenuity, and fear. This was not architecture for beauty. It was architecture for war. And so we begin at the threshold, the gateway between life and death. The medieval castle was never just a refuge. It was a trap. To enter its gates was to step into a riddle designed to kill you slowly. Drawbridges, groaned like the breath of beasts, leading to portcullises, a lattice of iron teeth ready to snap shut without warning. Above them, murder holes gaped like unblinking eyes. Through these, defenders could rain fire, stones, or boiling oil on the heads of those foolish enough to press forward. But these were only the visible teeth. The real danger lay in what you couldn't see. Imagine this. You breach the first gate. Your heart pounds. Victory feels close enough to taste. And then you're funneled into a narrow, twisting corridor, its walls closing in like a noose. This is the killing ground, the choke point. Arrows hiss from slits barely wide enough for light. From hidden angles, defenders unleash death without ever showing their faces. You are inside, but you are nowhere safe. Castles were not static. They evolved like living organisms, adapting to new predators. The earliest fortresses were simple wooden motte and bailey structures, cheap, fast to build, but vulnerable to fire. By the 12th century, they were reborn in stone, and with each generation, their defenses grew more cunning. Towers no longer stood square. They became round, shedding blind spots, deflecting siege engines. Walls thickened like scars, sloping outward in a silent warning. You will break before I do. But here lies the paradox. For all their strength, castles were never invincible. Every wall invited a question. How long before someone finds a way to break me? And so, the arms race began, a dance of escalation between defense and destruction. Trebuchets hurled stones the weight of oxen. Siege towers rolled forward like wooden giants. Miners crawled beneath the earth, tunneling to bring walls crashing down from below. For every defense, a countermeasure. For every countermeasure, a new form of terror. Yet within this deadly game, something remarkable emerges. The art of thinking ahead. These castles were not built on blind tradition. They were engineered with a precision that borders on obsession. Take concentric design, the evolution that changed everything. Picture not one wall, but two or even three, wrapped around each other like the claws of a serpent. Breach the first, and you find another, higher and crawler, looming above you. Between them, a killing field of space designed for archers to harvest lives like wheat. And then there is water. The moat, often reduced in popular imagination to a cartoonish ring filled with crocodiles. The truth is subtler and far more lethal. A moat wasn't just an obstacle, it was a psychological weapon. It made the fortress seem untouchable, its reflection shimmering like a mirage of power. But beneath that calm surface lay mud that could swallow a warhorse whole, and water that could chill an armored knight to death in minutes. Still, the moat is only the beginning. In some castles, water was weaponized further, flowing through hidden channels into cisterns deep within the earth. Why? Because a siege was not always won with swords. Often, it was thirst that conquered men. To deny water was to deny life. And so the defenders kept their lifeblood flowing in silence, even as enemies starved outside the walls. But what of those walls themselves, the great grey faces staring down at centuries of storms? Look closer. They are not mere slabs of stone. They are puzzles of geology and geometry, layered with secrets. Each block carefully fitted, often without mortar, locking together like pieces of an ancient code. Some castles were built so perfectly that their walls have outlasted empires. How did men without cranes, without modern tools, achieve this? Historians tell us of rope and pulley, of winches and scaffolds. Yet when you stand before the seamless curve of a 12th to 8th century tower, you can't help but feel a whisper of doubt. Did they know something we do not? And then there are the stones themselves. Many came from quarries miles away, dragged across brutal landscapes at costs that bled treasuries dry. Why go to such lengths? Some say it was about strength, about permanence. But there are those who notice patterns, unexplained alignments, orientations that echo older, forgotten monuments. Mere coincidence? Or does it hint at a continuity of knowledge, a thread stretching back to civilizations we barely remember? Perhaps the answer lies not in what remains above ground, but in what sleeps beneath. For every tower that claws at the sky, there is a shadow underground. Tunnels, chambers, and hidden sally ports where escape and ambush entwined in darkness. Some of these passageways led to wells, others to forests miles away. A secret artery system pulsing beneath the stone heart of the fortress. But why such complexity? What were they so afraid of, or what were they hiding from? Power, after all, is never without paranoia. And the castle was not merely a fortress, it was a statement. Every battlement, every barbican was a word in a silent language of dominance. These structures were not built just to keep enemies out. They were built to keep subjects in or to remind them, with every glance upward, of who ruled and who obeyed. But here is the great irony. The very walls that once promised eternal security would, in time, become prisons of their own ambition. For when gunpowder came, and cannons roared like dragons at the dawn of a new age, the old fortresses could do nothing but crumble. Their age ended, not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap, and yet they remain, silent, unyielding, scattered across the hills and valleys of Europe like bones of forgotten giants. Tourists walk their halls now, cameras in hand, blind to the minds that once sharpened these stones into weapons of will. The truth waits for those who can see past the ruins, into the design that outlived its purpose. The walls are behind us now, but their shadow stretches far. For those who breached them, few ever lived to tell the tale. The castle was not a fortress in the simple sense. It was a labyrinth, a mind game, a living presence designed to bend the will of those who dared to challenge it. Once inside, the real war began not with swords, but with silence, space, and terror. Step through the gatehouse, and you enter a world of deliberate confusion. Corridors that twist like serpents, courtyards layered with false exits, staircases that spiral not upward in freedom, but inward toward traps. Nothing inside a medieval castle was accidental. The layout itself was a weapon, shaped to control human instinct. Consider the spiral staircase an innocent feature to the casual tourist, a death sentence to the invader. Almost every castle spiral turns clockwise as it ascends. Why? Because a right-handed attacker, climbing the steps, finds his sword arm cramped against the central column, while the defender above slashes freely, his blade sweeping into the widening arc. The very geometry of the staircase betrays you, turning your own strength against you. But defense was never just physical, it was psychological. The deeper you went, the more the castle became a theater of fear. Narrow loops, called loopholes, pierced the walls like eyes. You could not see who watched, who aimed. At any moment, the hiss of an unseen arrow could end your life. Imagine the weight of that knowledge, the dread of an invisible enemy. This was the essence of medieval warfare. The unseen was always deadlier than the seen. Then there were the murder holes. Their name speaks plainly, but their function was artful. Carved into the ceiling of passageways, they turned the very air above you into a threat. A moment of hesitation, a glance upward, and death poured down stones, boiling water, quicklime that burned through flesh. And as you writhed in agony, the architecture whispered a cruel truth. You never stood a chance. These measures tell us something profound about the medieval mind. War for them was not just about brute force, it was about intellect. To build a castle was to play chess with reality, to anticipate moves, to design traps so subtle that they turned chaos into control. And yet, for all their cleverness, these architects did not rely on stone alone. They understood the power of fire. Castles were built for siege, and siege was fire's dominion. When invaders set rams to gates or tunnels to walls, defenders struck with flaming arrows, pitch, and oil. Fire was the great equalizer, a force that made stone bleed and wood scream. Entire sieges ended in walls of flame, the sky glowing like a second dawn. And yet, in that inferno, defenders found another advantage. For castles were not mere shells, they were lungs of stone, breathing through chimneys, vents, and flues. Some were designed to suck the smoke away from the great halls, leaving defenders clear while the enemy choked in darkness. But let us descend further into the spaces where light dies. Beneath the castle floors lies the underworld, the dungeons, the oubliettes, the secret vaults. Here, the architecture ceases to be defensive. It becomes punitive, almost ritualistic. The oubliette, a chamber with no door, only a shaft from above. Its name means to forget. And forget is what they did, casting prisoners into these black throats of stone, where time had no meaning. Was this purely punishment, or was it something more? Some historians believe the placement of these chambers served a symbolic purpose, to bury threats beneath the very heart of power, as if entombing chaos in the earth itself. And then there are the rumors, whispers of rooms that appear on no plan, passages that led nowhere, or everywhere. In some castles, archaeologists have found blocked tunnels, their purpose unknown. Did they serve as escape routes, smuggling channels, or something stranger, spaces for rites we were never meant to witness? For scattered among the stone and mortar of medieval Europe are manuscripts, esoteric texts, written in ciphered Latin, describing fortification arcana, secret fortifications. They speak of devices that never appear in conventional chronicles. Gates designed to collapse under specific weights, staircases that could reverse their direction, rooms where sound carried like a ghost through hidden vents. Are these inventions of paranoid minds, or glimpses into a science of fear lost to time? Consider the builders themselves. The master masons who shaped these citadels guarded their knowledge as fiercely as kings guarded their crowns. Their craft was cloaked in oaths, their symbols carved into hidden corners. Some of these marks are still there, geometric sigils, cryptic initials, spirals that echo the patterns of sacred geometry. Did they encode meaning into the stones? Did they believe they were not merely building castles, but invoking protection through ratio, proportion, and mystery? And yet, even as these defenses grew ever more elaborate, the world beyond the walls was changing. By the late Middle Ages, the threat was no longer the lone siege engine rumbling across the field. It was armies armed with gunpowder, weapons that could shatter centuries of stone with a single roar. The age of the fortress was dying. And yet, instead of surrender, builders adapted once again. Walls thickened into monsters of masonry, angled to deflect cannonballs. Bastions bloomed outward like stone petals, shaping the first star forts. The castle was becoming something new, less a home, more a machine of war. But while this transformation unfolded, another truth lingered in silence. Castles were never just military engines. They were theatres of power, symbols carved into landscapes, designed as much to impress as to defend. The sight of them, looming on a hilltop, spoke louder than any decree. Here is authority made eternal. Here is order in stone. And for those who gazed upon it from peasant to prince, the message was clear. Challenge this, and you challenge the cosmos itself. Yet even symbols fade. Today, these fortresses stand as ruins, stripped of their terror, softened by moss and time. Children laugh where armies died. Lovers walk where blood once poured in the mud. But the stones remember. Touch them, and you feel the echo of a different age, a time when survival was an art, and architecture was its brush. And so the question remains, why do these relics still hold us in their grip? Why do we, centuries later, walk their walls and feel a shiver of awe? Perhaps because, deep down, we sense the truth. These castles were not merely defenses against men. They were defenses against oblivion, a way for human will to carve its permanence into the bones of the earth. But permanence is an illusion. The walls cracked, the gates fell, and the real secrets slipped through the fractures like smoke. Some say those secrets are still out there, buried beneath ruins, waiting for the day someone dares to dig deep enough. What would we find if we did? Plans for fortifications that defy modern understanding, or something older, stranger knowledge that should never have survived the fire. For if history teaches us anything, it is this: the past does not die. It waits, in stone, in silence, in the shadows of castles that were never meant to be just walls, but warnings. They stand like fossils of ambition. These fortresses silent, withered, patient. Yet for all their stone and shadow, they are not empty. They hum with questions, like the last vibrations of a distant bell. Questions no chronicle dares to answer, because they strike at something deeper than strategy or stonecraft. What if these castles icons of the medieval world were not the beginning of something, but the echo of something far older? Beneath their walls, archaeologists have uncovered anomalies, foundation stones laid in patterns that predate the castles themselves by centuries. Some bear tool marks no chisel of the Middle Ages could have made. In Cornwall, fragments of walls buried beneath tintature suggest an earlier fortification, a structure aligned not to the horizon of its time, but to solstices, as if marrying warfare with the stars. Was this mere coincidence, or does it whisper of a continuum of knowledge, passed down in silence, disguised as progress? And what of the geometry, the spirals of staircases, the ratios of towers, the symmetry of curtain walls, patterns that, to the trained eye, echo principles found in sacred architecture, from Gothic cathedrals to the temples of antiquity? Did these masons, these masters of mortar and stone, inherit fragments of a language older than Christendom, a language of power encoded in proportion, intended to make stone not just strong, but resonant? Consider this. In 1445, a manuscript surfaces in Milan, attributed to an architect named Philaret. Buried in its elegant Latin are passages that seem almost fevered, describing a fortress of harmony whose walls vibrate with divine ratios, rendering them unassailable not by force, but by imbalance. Modern historians dismiss these as allegory, yet in the margins of the text, scrawled in a different hand, is a diagram of a polygon fortress, unlike any built in Europe at the time. 2 centuries later, the star fort appears. Coincidence? Or prophecy? And then there are the stranger accounts half hidden in chronicles, whispered like sins. A scribe in Normandy writes of a lord who ordered his castle built on the lines of the old stones, lines revealed only by moonlight at midsummer. A German text speaks of a fortress whose walls sang when struck, as if hollow, as if alive. These could be fantasies, distortions of memory, but if so, why do they surface across lands and languages like fragments of a broken mirror? Perhaps the answer lies not in what was built, but in what was buried. Beneath the castles of Europe lie tunnels, yes, for escape, for supply, but some led to chambers with no practical purpose. Circular rooms, carved with symbols alien to Christian stonework, spirals, interlocking triangles, diagrams that mirror those in Hermetic manuscripts, those same manuscripts condemned to fire by inquisitors for speaking of hidden harmonies. Were these spaces places of refuge, or places of invocation? If the builders of castles understood proportion as power, might they have believed their geometry did more than deflect arrows, that it bent the world itself? Speculation, perhaps, but speculation is the marrow of truth waiting for flesh. We know this much. Knowledge is never neutral. It fortifies, or it falls. And in the centuries when the world reeled from plague, crusade, and chaos, who held the maps of hidden wisdom, who carved their secrets not in ink, but in the very bones of Europe? For what is a castle if not a spell of permanence, a stone incantation against time? And yet every spell is fragile. The gunpowder age shattered these illusions. grinding harmony into rubble. The old ways fled underground into symbols, into stories, into ruins that speak only to those who listen. And so we return to the question that stalks these halls like a shadow. Were castles merely engines of war, or monuments to a knowledge we were never meant to keep? Knowledge that moves in cycles, that rises when the world forgets, and vanishes when it threatens the order of things. Perhaps that is why we still walk their ruins, why we feel the chill, that pull, because deep down we sense the truth. The walls were never meant to keep out armies. They were meant to keep out time itself, but time always wins. And yet, in some forgotten corner of some forgotten keep, there may still lie a chamber sealed with mortar-like bone, its air untouched for 600 years. Inside, a chest. Inside the chest, a scroll inked in symbols no scholar can read, a geometry of power, a language of stone, the last whisper of a science we call superstition, because we cannot bear the alternative that we are not the first to master the art of fortification, and that the architects of yesterday built not for the was of their age, but for a reckoning still to come. Until then, the castles wait, watching, silent, their secrets carved into shadow, waiting for the one who dares to read what history tried to erase. If these walls spoke to you, if you felt the weight of their secrets, let the world know. Share this story. Let it travel like a whisper through the corridors of the forgotten. Subscribe for the next descent into the shadows, because some doors are opening, and you will want to be there when they do.